Hello everyone, welcome again to the Prado Museum for another of our weekly sessions in English. We're here in this gallery of classical sculpture and we'll be having a closer look today at the Diadumenos. This is a Roman copy that's made around the year 150 of a Greek original by Polyclitus from the year 420 BC, around the year 420 BC. And it features this figure of the Diadumenos, who is this young, beautiful, athletic man who's tying a band around his head. This was purchased by Isabella Farnese, Queen Isabella Farnese, and her husband, King Philip V of Spain in the 18th century from the collection of the Queen of Sweden, of Christina of Sweden. And they bought that collection of sculpture to decorate the Palace of La Granja in Segovia, a beautiful palace in just about an hour outside of Madrid. So we see this figure here, and he doesn't look like he's necessarily tying this band around his head. This is actually a little bit different than what the original iconography would have been, because when this was found in the 17th century, it wasn't entirely complete. The bust was found with this arm that's reaching upwards, with the head complete, the entire torso, and the upper part of the legs until just below the knees. But in the 17th century, there was a very different idea about how works like this should be restored. And the priority was to return this work to its whole, to be able to see the entire work complete. This is not necessarily what we would do today. The criteria for restoration has completely changed. There'd be no problem with seeing a fragment of a classical sculpture in a gallery today. But in the 17th century, people wanted to complete the piece. And so this wasn't an easy job to do. You can imagine that these things are found in archaeological excavations. They're broken, and not necessarily all of the pieces are going to be near one another to be able to piece them back together. So this raises the question, well, what did the original look like? How did they know what the original looked like? Because the studies of iconography were much less advanced in that time than they were today. It really won't be until about the 18th century with Winckelmann that we actually have systematic studies of the iconography of classical sculpture. And so people didn't know when they saw this bust that they were actually looking at the Diadumenos, which is somebody that ties a band around his head. And so when they saw this bent arm, they thought, well, this athletic man must be doing something like shooting an arrow. And so this sculpture was completed with this arm here that's coming down to finish that action, to look like he is preparing to shoot an arrow, like he has a bow and arrow in his hand, and we can even see these fingers here that look like he's actually using that bow and arrow. Now the legs were easy to deduce what the rest of the legs would have looked like. These are very close to what the original would have looked like, because since we can even see this line here, since we have the knees complete from the original, it was much easier to see what those legs would have looked like. So this is how we've ended up with this sort of archer version of the Diadumenos in the Prado. Now, in the 20th century, there was actually some interest in maybe correcting this mistake, this misinterpretation of what this figure was doing. And so there was another arm that was made, and it was the option was studied of whether that arm should replace an arm that would be lifted up to show this man tying this band around his head. But the conservation team decided not to do it, that it wasn't a safe option for the integrity of the entire sculpture, because the criteria for restoration was different in the 17th century. When they put this arm on, they attached it in a way that it would have been incredibly difficult to take off again without harming the original piece. Now today, when conservationists work on restoring a piece of art, they always do so in a way that restoration, that intervention is reversible, but that is not the way it was done in the 17th century. So there wasn't a really safe way to remove this arm and put on another one. But in a way, I think this particularity really adds to the story of this sculpture, because it really tells us these multiple layers of history. We have the Greek original by Polyclitus, we have the Roman copy, and then we have the 17th century intervention as well, which in and of itself is a beautiful example of Baroque sculpture, because the workshops that would do these kinds of restorations, these kinds of interventions, were sometimes some of the best workshops that were around. And so this is a beautiful piece of 17th century sculpture. And not only that, but it tells us about the history of conservation, the history of restoration, the history of how people related with, how they understood, how they saw classical art, what the tastes were, and their relationship with it. So really we have like these multiple layers of history, and it kind of enriches what we can learn from just this one art object by having this particularity here. Now, Phidias and his disciples were really known for portraying the gods, but Polyclitus was really interested in the representation of the perfect man, of the ideal man, and we can see this in his work, right? We can see this interest in finding this perfect proportion of ideal beauty in what is called the canon. And this is the idea of the proportions of the relationships between the different parts of the body in a way that we get this idea of perfect beauty, of ideal beauty, and of harmony. And Polyclitus didn't just put this into his sculptures, but he also wrote about it. He wrote a book called the Canon that has been it hasn't survived in its entirety, but we have pieces of it, and we know that he applied a lot of the theories that he wrote in the canon in his sculptures. So when historians look at his sculptures, they can pull out, they can deduce, they can conclude what some of those ideas were. And they were always based on mathematical proportions. He was probably influenced by Pythagorean ideas. Pythagoras wrote that beauty in music, that harmony in music was a result of the relation of the parts to the whole, and that is what made music beautiful. And so we see Polyclitus doing this here really visually, thinking about those proportions and creating this idea of ideal beauty. One of the examples that is easiest to see, that's most famous, is the height, right? That he is, that Polyclitus has taken the length of the head, and then the height of the figure would be 7 times that height, and this would be the ideal height. Well, this sculpture in Polyclitus's work is filled with this kind of mathematical formula that talks not just about ideal beauty, but about something even larger. It has, I think, philosophical implications of divine order. So I hope you've enjoyed having a closer look with me at the Diadumenos, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.